All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we are giving you a little bit of a preview about an hour before the 2022 NFL Draft kicks off. We'll be talking all about what the Falcons are going to do in round one tonight.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you are locked on Falcons. And of course, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the team for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans. And of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, as well as the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, today is a very special live episode coming at you live, no longer the sort of pre-recorded stuff that you normally see on Locked On Falcons on YouTube, guys. And we're just going to be talking draft. I got a couple of thoughts on what the Falcons may or may not do on today's episode. But, as we get further on and I've spewed all my hot takes about the Falcons draft plans, we'll turn the show over for you guys that are watching live on YouTube in the chat. So if you want to send in and submit some questions and try to steer this conversation, of course, you will have that opportunity to do so on tonight's show. So let's jump into it and talk about what the Falcons are going to do. There's a lot of buzz. Pretty much most people that, work for one of the big NFL media websites believe that the Falcons are going to take a wide receiver. I have been on this podcast the last several weeks, certainly the last several days, in shock and horror over the idea of the Falcons taking a wide receiver. But we'll sort of see if that happens. There's enough people out there, the Peter Schrager's of the world, the Steve Weishes of the world, the Matt Millers of the world, among some others, that think the Falcons are going to go with a pass rusher. That's the hope. That's the dream. That's the goal, But we'll just sort of see if the Falcons follow suit on that. For those of you that have not been watching or listening to Locked On Falcons over these last couple of days and don't know necessarily my stance on wide receiver, I won't go into it. But essentially, to me, we've gone through a decade of the Falcons' strength of their roster being their skill positions, their offensive weapons, all that various stuff, and it didn't really get the team to where they needed to go. It did not produce a sustainably successful team because of the weaknesses in the trenches, the weaknesses on defense. And to me, if this regime wants to build a sustainable and successful team long-term and not just a team that's basically got one or two, flash in the pan seasons like we've seen over the last decade, a team that can consistently compete at the highest levels year in and year out, they need to address that. And I think that starts in this rebuild, in this year's draft, at the top of this year's draft, by going for a player that's going to either help their defense or help them on the trenches on offense, and taking another wide receiver. Well, there are some good wide receivers available in this draft class. There's no doubt about that. I don't think it's really going to move the needle forward for this team. And it's certainly not the identity that I think Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot should be looking to establish in their first year of the rebuild. So that's my anti-wide receiver stance in a nutshell. If the Falcons take a wide receiver, at this point in time, I haven't made peace with it, but I'm not going to flip out, I guess. It's just, you just kind of hope that if they go in that direction, they kill day two of the draft by getting those pieces elsewhere on much more needier positions. And then you hope next year, with the cap space and, probably the high draft pick, they get the quarterback with that pick. And then you just hope they can just buy an offensive line and buy a defense in free agency next year, because, clearly they're going to need to if they decide to start this thing out with a wide receiver. So that's my hope, but we'll see. We'll see, right? Fingers crossed, Falcons don't have to go there, and I don't have to spend tomorrow morning's episode on Locked On Falcons ranting about, how terrible this draft selection is. But we got a question. We'll open things up to the chat, but I do want to answer a question that someone submitted to me on Twitter first from Nacho F at Nacho ATL. He asked, best case and worst case scenario for you tonight, Aaron. I guess a combination of wide receiver and trading up for Matt Corral would be the worst. And yes, that is the worst case scenario, right? You guys on Monday, you heard my mock draft Monday episode where I had the Falcons taking Jermaine Johnson at 8 and then trading back in round 1 to get Desmond Ridder, the quarterback. And I think it's a realistic possibility that the Falcons do that. But if that player, I let my thoughts know on a wide receiver. For me, if you're going to take a wide receiver, like Jamison Williams is, to me, the one guy that's special in this draft class, right? That has the potential to be a special game breaker, keep defensive coordinators up at night, trying to game plan against you type of player. I don't think there's anybody else in this draft class that has that ability. Next on my list is Drake London. He's got the size. He fits the scheme, all that various stuff. I don't think he's going to be like this elite number 1, but I think he can be a really high quality wide receiver, 1,000-yard receiver, that type of player. Then to me, my next wide receiver is Jahan Dotson. Like, I feel like if you're going to draft a slot receiver and, Jahan Dotson's the best guy in this draft class, I think Garrett Wilson's a slot receiver, and I don't think he's better at being a slot receiver than Jahan Dotson is. And so if you're asking me what the worst case scenario is, if the Falcons take a wide receiver at 8 and it's Garrett Wilson, to me, who's like the 5th or 6th best wide receiver in this draft class, which I know is a spicy take because everybody else has him. He's a consensus number 1 guy, which I still don't understand why people love them some Garrett Wilson like that. And then, trading up for Matt Corral, who I think is like the 6th or 7th best quarterback. I only watched 7 quarterbacks, but I saw 6 guys that I thought were better than Matt Corral. So that kind of tells you where I'm at with Matt Corral. So yes, that would be the worst case scenario, Nacho. Long story short, taking a wide receiver and taking like Garrett Wilson and then trading up for Matt Corral or whatever the case may be. Best case scenario is probably some form of trade back. Like there's some rumors that Evan Neal's going to fall. And so I think like the best case scenario might be Evan Neal does indeed fall. The Falcons trade back to say 13. I think there's some rumors out there that Houston wants to move back into the top 10 from their 13th overall selection to get whoever their guy is after they pick 3rd overall. And like maybe you trade back from 8 to 13, pick up, I don't know, a 2nd round pick. I don't know what the trade chart is. I haven't looked into it. But let's say you pick up a 2nd round pick from Houston. You still get Evan Neal at 13 because he falls out of the top 10 somehow, some way. And you get that sort of bookend right tackle that can be your long-term left tackle, could also compete for guard if that's the scenario because he has some experience playing guard as well. So you get that sort of beast, that monster on the offensive line, at 13, a player that once upon a time some people thought was going to be the number 1 pick in Evan Neal. You could pick up an extra 2nd round pick. So now you have 3 seconds and 2/3, right, to go on day 2 and continue to sort of add to your roster or whatever the case may be. So that's probably the best case scenario for me in terms of tonight. A trade back, you still get one of the top 7 or 8 players in this draft class. And you also pick up a 2nd or something like that. So that's the best case scenario. So I hope that answers your question, Nacho. And now, guys, I'm out of takes. So now it's going to be up to you guys in the chat to sort of guide the conversation, scrolling through, just killing time, wasting air as I read all these comments. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of you guys are expressing similar sentiments as me. D-line or O-line at the 8th pick, want a pass rusher. Matt Ariza at 8, let's get it. That's from, let me see. Let me get these graphics off so you can see the comments. Yeah, from Derek, he says, Matt Ariza at 8, let's get it. It's funny is like, there's this hype for Matt Ariza, and the Falcons will probably wind up drafting Matt Ariza because he's got the San Diego State connection. But he's actually the 2nd best punter in this draft. The Penn State punter, Jordan Stout's better. But that's a spicy take. Everybody wants the punt guy. Percentage of the Falcons selecting for either the offensive or defensive lines from B Cheat 13. I want to say, I want to say it's like 75%, like a 75% chance that they go in that direction. Get a trench player on either side of the ball. But, you again, like based off of the mock drafts I've seen over the last like couple of days, it only seems like 20% of them seem to think the Falcons are going to go in that direction. So hopefully this is another instance where I can sit here and chastise people on don't pay any attention to mock drafts. They don't know what they're talking about. But the thing that gives me pause is around this time last year, everybody was saying, everybody was plugged in, was like, it's going to be Kyle Pitts. And it wound up being Kyle Pitts, even though at the time I thought it was going to be Justin Fields. So that's part of the reason why if I sound beat down, if I look physically tired, it's because I'm like, oh, not again. We're doing this again. Question from Daniel Connies. What are your thoughts on Kayvon? A lot of people are not very high on. I am not as high on Kayvon Thibodeau as most other people are. I think he's a good player. I think he's certainly probably one of the 10 best players in this draft class, maybe even one of the 5 best players in this draft class. But I think this draft class is not great. So, what I've infamously said about Kayvon Thibodeau is, even though some people think he's the best pass rusher in this draft class, and I certainly understand why people value, he's got the one trait that stands out about Kayvon that we know translates to success in the NFL is that first step quickness, right? We talk about wide receivers, right? And what is the thing that all great wide receivers share? It's the ability to get open, right? Separation, that sort of thing. That's the number one trait that, you can be big, you can be small, you can be fast, you can be, whatever, but all wide receivers get open, right? All the best get open. So when it comes to pass rushers, the one trait that all great pass rushers share is that first step explosiveness. And that's, I think, a big reason why a lot of people are big fans of Kayvon Thibodeau, because he has that above several of the other players in this draft class. When you watch the film, my issue with Kayvon is like when he doesn't beat guys off the ball like that, like when he's locked in and he's got that and he's timing the snap well, and like he's a handful for offensive tackles. But when he's not doing that, like he's not really bringing a whole lot to the table, or like nothing. Like, again, it's not to sit here and say he's bad or anything, but like there's nothing about his game that really stands out otherwise compared to any of the other pass rushers in this draft class. Certainly the guys that are being expected to go at the top, like Aiden Hutchinson, Trayvon Walker, Jermaine Johnson, etc., as well as George Karlaftis. So like, to me, Kayvon is a speed rusher that I don't know if his other elements of his game are going to get there. The hand technique, the power. Again, he doesn't lack in those areas. Like, he's not terrible or anything like that, but I don't necessarily know if those areas are going to be things that he can lean on at the next level, like he did in college. And that's going to lead to maybe some struggles for him at the next level. So I think there's a lot of things that Kayvon Thibodeau's got to clean up. I won't get into them all today. Obviously, if he winds up being the Falcons pick, which I think there's a chance, I won't think it's a strong chance, but I think they prefer Jermaine Johnson, is my personal opinion, over Kayvon Thibodeau. But certainly, if it comes down to Kayvon Thibodeau or wide receiver, who I want the Falcons to take in that situation. So I like Kayvon. I just don't like him nearly to the same degree that other people do. I don't think he's this sort of generational talent. I don't think he's, special in that regard. I think he's very good. But, I said, infamously, like, if he was in last year's class, he wouldn't be the best pass rusher in last year's class. Jalen Phillips is a better prospect than him, and Jalen Phillips went 18 overall, although Jalen Phillips had, off-field character injury concerns that led to him falling in the draft. But Jalen Phillips is probably a better prospect than probably any of the pass rushers in this draft class, with maybe the exception of Aiden Hutchinson. Just depends on where you feel about Aiden Hutchinson. So that's my thoughts. Nathan Floyd asks, the rumors about Houston wanting to trade up from 13 to inside the top 10, do you think Atlanta Falcons have called? Yes. I think teams are definitely on the phone lines. Teams will continue to be on the phone lines right up until the Falcons pick. So I think I'm pretty confident the Falcons have talked to the Texans. I'm sure the Falcons have talked to probably, at least the vast majority of the 31 other teams to sort of gauge where they're at headed into tonight, and will be willing to, run those phone lines into the ground until they find the trade that they like, or decide to stay put at 8. Santi Domel asks, what do you actually see in Jermaine Johnson? It's hard for me to tell who's the best prospect between him and Karlaftis. I think the thing that you like about Jermaine Johnson, he checks a lot of the boxes. He's got the tools, right? Right now, the only tool that is refined in his arsenal is his power. He's an excellent bull rusher. You can argue that from using his power, he's probably the most effective in this draft class. Although I think Trayvon Walker is just much more naturally powerful, just a naturally powerful human being than Jermaine Johnson is. But I think in terms of a guy that has a refined tool that he can come into the league and that will be effective against NFL offensive tackles, which is his bull rush. Jermaine Johnson checks that box. The questions about Jermaine Johnson is what else is he going to bring to the arsenal? Now he has the speed, he has the burst, he has the bend potential to do multiple other things, to win with speed and turning the corner and whatnot. He just hasn't shown really much refinement in doing those things. And so the team that drafts him, hopefully the Falcons, will have to figure out a way to get more out of him. So I think that's the main thing that you like about Jermaine Johnson. Just he's just much more refined bull rusher, I think, than someone like a Karlaftis. Any sleeper picks at 8 from Daquan Patton? Jordan Davis is probably the sleeper right now that like no one's talking about, that I think has a legit chance to be the pick, particularly if, as some people think, the 4 edge rushers will go off the board, in the top 7 picks, in Walker, Hutchinson, Johnson, and Thibodeau. And I think in that situation, if you're the Falcons and you want to address your trenches, then all of a sudden Jordan Davis becomes a lot more interesting and much more compelling of a pick at that 8 spot. I'm glad you guys are submitting punter questions. I love talking punters. Special teams matters, as you guys know. So Nathan Floyd says it might be Camarda from UGA. They did spend a good amount of time with him. Yeah, I think Camarda is going to get drafted. I think Camarda is the guy that you get in probably like round 6 or 7, because I think Ariza and Jordan Stout are probably going to go earlier than that. So if you're not willing to use a 4th or 5th round pick on a punter, which is probably where guys like Stout and Ariza are going to go, Camarda is your sort of consolation prize, that he's a solid punter. Like, he's not incredible by any means, in my opinion. And again, I haven't done a deep dive on punters, of course. Who sits there and spends hours watching, punter film? Certainly not me. I would never do that. But he's solid. That's what I'll say. He's solid. He certainly is a guy that can be a capable punter in the NFL. I think Camarda checks those boxes. So he's a nice sort of consolation prize. He's the bronze medal for the team looking for punters in this draft class. Josh Gilham says Wilson or London at 8. Again, Jamison Williams should be the pick, but if I had to choose between these two, I would definitely go Drake London. Kool-Aid Titty, great name. Who do you prefer out of Aquanu and Neal for the Falcons? I'm an Aquanu guy, right? I'm definitely an Aquanu guy. I'll say that. Kinshantis Martin says, how long will the rant be tomorrow if the Falcons go wide receiver? In my head right now, I'm thinking it's only going to be like 15 minutes. So it's going to be like half the episode. I will try, if they do go wide receiver, I will try to devote at least the other half of the episode to why it makes sense. I will do my best to put a positive spin on it for 15 minutes, and then you will get 15 minutes of me eviscerating the pick. So that's the plan. We'll see, how I feel about that in the next couple of hours. We're like 2 hours away from where the Falcons likely are going to be picking. Would California kid Kayvon even want to live in Atlanta? That's from Stephen B. Who doesn't want to live in Atlanta? It's a great place, great city, right? I mean, the only downside is traffic, right? I mean, that's really it. Other than that, cost of living, but cost of living in Atlanta, I don't know, but I would imagine the cost of living in Atlanta is a lot cheaper than the cost of living in California. So you guys can correct me on that if I'm wrong on that one. Let's see. Fifth alphabet. If Sauce is there at 8 and the top 3 D ends and O-line are off the board, do you take him? If not, then who? Um, it's probably not likely that Sauce is going to go there at 8. A lot of expectations he'll go like 3 or 4 in this draft. So he'll be, I would be surprised if he falls out of the top 5. I would be surprised at this point. It's not impossible, but I would be surprised at that point. Um, so like if it's me, while I'm not necessarily enamored with the idea of taking a cornerback when you don't have a pass rush, right? I will. That is to me a much more favorable situation than taking a wide receiver certainly, and say taking a probably a quarterback at that point in time, Malik Willis as well. So I would definitely take Sauce if that was the case, that situation. Uh, there are probably a couple of Hall of Fame players in this class. There's no telling who they will be, but they're out there. That's from Dream Conundrum, and he's probably right, or he or she's probably right. Right, that's usually the case. But like that goes to why the draft is such a crapshoot, because a lot of that is kind of dependent on where guys go. Like there will be certain players that have the right skill set for the right team at the right time, right circumstances, and just everything clicks into place. But without knowing who that team is going to be, it's nearly impossible to predict that, because there are certain players that could go to one team and it could instantly be a success there, and go to another team and instantly fail there. And that's just sort of the nature of the draft. Um, Trade back to 20 with Steelers, allowing them to jump Seattle for a quarterback and grab Karlaftis. That's from AT O'Hara. Um, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be against doing that. Depends on who's on the board at 8 for us. You know, I like Karlaftis, but I don't love him in the scheme. So he feels like where I would go if none of the other 4 edge rushers are on the board. If Johnson and Thibodeau are gone, we expect Walker and Hutchinson to be the first 2 picks, although there's been growing buzz that Hutchinson might fall all the way to 3 or 4 in this draft. So we'll see if that winds up being true, or is that's just people throwing stuff at the wall hoping something will stick. So like to me, Karlaftis is more like a 5 technique in my mind than a true edge that's going to drop into space and be a 3-4 outside linebacker. So like that's not ideally what I'm looking for with the Falcons right now. So like if we're trading back, like it's because we couldn't get any of the other edges, and we're like, okay, well, we'll settle for Karlaftis at 20 and pick up, a second round pick or a future first round pick or something like that from the Steelers in the process. But that wouldn't be my ideal strategy. Okay, Nathan Floyd says latest buzz is Eagles, Cowboys, and Packers are looking to move up. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. Like, go back 2 years ago and everybody was saying, oh, the Falcons were definitely going to trade up. They're definitely looking to move up, and they didn't trade up. Now, doesn't mean that they didn't try, but it just means like teams are calling. And I think what happens, at least again, we'll see if I'm wind up being wrong on this, is that you got a whole lot of people in NFL media that are reporting, oh, teams are on the phone lines talking to teams about trading up, and they're like, oh, they're trying to trade up. And it's like, no, they're just trying to figure out the lay of the land. Everybody's calling everybody to see, what are you thinking? If we move back here, hypothetically, if we move back here, how, what would you give us? Or, what would it take for us to swap? Like teams are trying to figure all that stuff out ahead of time. And I think it often gets reported as like, oh, all these teams are looking to move up. And it's like, maybe they'll just sort of see how the draft falls and maybe they go up, but probably not. Jordan Davis is a full year younger than Jermaine Johnson. Good little tidbit, Stephen B. Appreciate the insight. How do you feel about Lewis Cine? That's some San Skizzy. I'm a big fan of Lewis Cine. Like basically, I like all the Georgia players with the exception of George Pickens. I'm trying to think. Is there any other Georgia player that I'm not a fan of? I'm not a big Darian Kendrick guy either. But other than that, like I like all the Georgia prospects. So Lewis Cine, I'm always a big fan of safeties that will strike you, and I don't think there's a bigger striker in this draft class than Lewis Cine. I haven't watched all the safeties. I probably only really watched him, Hamilton, and a handful of others, but he's definitely high up on that list. Okay, let's see. Someone asked a question about Troy Anderson. I haven't watched him. Sorry for the dead air, guys. Just scrolling through these questions. Eddie Williams asks, how many starters do the Falcons come away with within the draft, I mean, the hope is that you can get at least 3, right? Like plug and play starters, at least 3, right? Like you want to get an edge. You probably want to get a wide receiver. Um, maybe a D tackle. Those are probably the 3 you're most likely to get a starter. There's other positions where you could certainly have a guy competing for a spot or competing for a prominent role. Obviously, if they were to take a quarterback at 8, that, I know Marcus Mariota is going to start week 1, but he's probably going to be on the bench by like week 6 if they take, say, Malik Willis. A running back probably won't start week 1, but the right running back could wind up being, the starter by the end of the season, getting the bulk of the carries. Certainly, there's an opportunity for a tight end later in the draft. It won't be a true starter, but will get starting reps because of how much the Falcons want to use 2 tight end sets. I'm reluctant and hesitant to believe that the Falcons are going to take an offensive lineman, but we know there's one spot on the offensive line that you bring in anybody that's a halfway decent prospect, there's a decent chance he might win that starting spot. I'm referring to left guard if you're not clear. Linebacker, you're probably not going to get a starter. Maybe if you find a way to get Nakobe Dean, I could see him winning a starting spot. But outside of him, I don't see anybody else, leapfrogging the current options. And cornerback, you seem set at. And yeah, safety is a possibility, but probably only if you use one of your top 2 picks on the safety, which I don't expect the Falcons to do. Certainly possible that they could. Jordan Yates asks, is Jordan Davis going to be the first shock of the draft? Critics will say it's too high. He's a 2-down player, etc., but he's a surefire hit, unlike Johnson or Kayvon. I used to be very anti Jordan Davis because I thought it said the same things. It's a 2-down player, all that stuff. It's too high. All this. That obviously changed. After the combine, I'm like, oh, look, that guy's a freak. So I am not going to say a negative thing. I wouldn't say he's a surefire hit. Like, is his floor high because what he he can give you certain value, as a 2-down player, as a run defender? Yes. The question with Jordan Davis is going to be, and whether he's a hit or not, is going to be determined by whether or not he can bring 3-down value to your roster, right? If he just winds up just basically being, Dexter Lawrence, I don't know if that's a hit, right? Now, I think he can be more than that. Don't get me wrong, but he kind of has to be Vita Vea, or he kind of has to be Damon Harrison, or Haloti Nada, or something like that, to be considered a hit where he's picked that high, and that's a relatively narrow bullseye. So that would be the concern with Jordan Davis being the pick. Like, again, I think you're definitely going to get a guy that is going to give you positive contributions to your team. I agree with you. His floor is probably higher. Like, there's a reality where Johnson and Kayvon are busts, probably not in the sense of like when we talk about busts, right? Everybody thinks of like Vic Beasley and Takk McKinley as these first-round busts that the Falcons take. And I look at that and I'm like, they were disappointing first-round picks. No doubt about that. Not arguing anything different. But like when you think about a true bust, like the Falcons had a first-round edge rusher that was a true bust, and that was Jamal Anderson, right? Like, that's a true bust. That guy had 7 career sacks in like 4 years in Atlanta, while like Takk and Vic Beasley exceeded that like in their within their first like 25 games in the NFL. So like I sit here and I go, like, when we talk about busts, like, I think there's a chance that Johnson and Kayvon could be busts, but again, it's more like Takk and Beasley, where they're disappointing first round picks, not like real busts. Like, oh man, that guy just couldn't even play in the league. Like, it's just like, oh, well, those guys can play in the league. They're just more role players than star players. Right. So I think that's probably the floors for guys like Johnson and Kayvon. And so I certainly think you can make a pretty easy argument, Jordan, that Jordan Davis will be more than that, just a quote unquote role player, but it kind of depends on how you value that stuff. Let's see. Ooh, man, I'm several minutes behind. Let's see. Well, guys, I appreciate the input. It's about 7:30 now. I've given you about 20 minutes of chat content. Sorry for any of those people that submitted chat questions that I did not get to. Sorry for being a little bit too long-winded. Sorry. So that was going to do it for us, guys. We will sort of turn our attention to as soon as I get this off the screen, turn our attention to the live show that is now ongoing on the Locked On NFL show, which is going pick by pick. This is the first Locked On NFL live stream. If you're looking to join us there, you will certainly see me later in the night when the Falcons make their pick, and you'll get my live reaction, not necessarily live because I'll have like 40 seconds to process it. But if you're looking for an entertaining reaction to the Falcons pick, you will certainly get it probably in an hour or so, or 2 hours or so from now when the Falcons are on the clock. But go ahead, head on over to the Locked On NFL show. The link is in the subscription below. Let me see. I think I can put a link in the chat as well. Hold on one second. Okay, so also the link is in the chat. So go ahead and head on over there, check out the live show, get the pick by pick analysis. If you're tired of NFL Network, tired of ESPN, and all the sort of groupthink takes, check out what the Locked On hosts have to say about tonight's draft and each pick, and get insightful analysis from not just sort of people that cover the NFL as a whole, but you're getting insightful analysis from people that know these teams better than anybody else. Know these teams even better than I know the Falcons. And I'm sure some of you guys are like, you don't know the Falcons at all, Aaron. And I'm like, that's the point. You're going to get even better analysis than you get on Locked On Falcons. So guys, check out the Locked On NFL live show. That's going to do it for us here. Guys, I really do appreciate this. We'll certainly be having a lot more live content during the season and sort of some post-game recaps, but maybe we'll do some stuff over the summer, particularly during that dead time of the summer when, not a whole lot of stuff is going on, and we can maybe do some stuff on the weekend. So this was a fun sort of first live foray here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And of course, if you want more of this and more insights, of course, leave a comment here. And of course, make sure you check out Locked On Falcons. Probably my guess is when the episode will go live on YouTube or audio. I don't know. I'm going to try to get it up earlier than I usually do. Usually it's like 3 a.m., the night of draft, because just so much stuff is going on, but I'm going to try to get up by 1, right? That's my shooting point. You can get the audio, the video version of the podcast, reacting to the pick at 1. If you're not willing to stay up that late, by all means, you'll get it first thing Friday morning on your preferred podcast platform, as well as here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. Guys, really did appreciate doing this. This was fun. We'll certainly be doing this again. Don't know when, but really enjoyed it, guys. But go check out the live show over at Locked On NFL and get that pick by pick analysis here on the Locked On Podcast Network, guys. Appreciate it.